Hello and welcome back to Exothermic Plays Games. This is part 3 of 5 for my series of videos covering my Game of the Year, Clair Obscur Expedition 33. The first video was an introduction to the project, the second video was ranking the characters narratively and going over a ton of spoiler stuff, and this is a much more spoiler-free ranking, going over combat mechanics overall, as well as ranking the characters by their combat mechanics, and having an overall ranking at the end. As I mentioned, it will be mostly spoiler-free, but just due to the nature of some of the characters existing, there's very, very light spoilers. After this video, there will be another combat-oriented one where I rank most of the boss fights, and then the last video will wrap it all up with some overall thoughts, some theories and analysis, and a great big discussion about where this game stacks up against the hundreds of other games on my gigantic ranked list. But I'm going to do my damnedest to keep this one shorter than the hour that the last video was, so without further ado, we've got Nevrons to kill. The combat in Expedition 33 is brilliant. I mean, chef's kiss. I'm not going to beat around the bush, so believe me when I say it is, quite simply, the best executed turn-based combat system I have ever played in my life. Is it revolutionary? No, actually. Does it have any new ideas? Shockingly, not one. But what it does do is combine the best elements of Final Fantasy 7, 8, 9, 10, and even 13, Dark Souls, a surprising amount of World of Warcraft, and even Paper Mario into the most fun blend of combat I've ever seen. The basic structure of combat in this game is that you have a party of up to 3 characters fighting at a time against a number of enemies, and you can see the turn order on the left side of the screen like in Final Fantasy X. Every character has totally different mechanics that we'll get into soon, but there are some overlapping things that they do have in common. You can spend your turn on one of 3 things: items, attacks, and skills. For your items, you don't have a gigantic inventory to manage, it's not some great big thing. There's only 3 items you'll actually ever have. One restores health to a living thing, one restores action points, more on those in a moment, to a living thing, and one brings a dead thing back to life. I really like that these items have charges and I don't have to worry about buying more or anything like that. Every time you save at a flag, there's these flags, you can rest and it replenishes them. You can upgrade them and they scale well into the higher difficulties of the game as you progress, and it rewards you for exploring because that's how you find additional quantities, that's how you find the stuff to upgrade them. Speaking of exploring, there's no random encounters in this game. You can see enemies as you run around each zone, and they can see you, and whoever gets the first hit gets to go first. In that regard, that's one of the smaller things it does happen to share with stuff like Paper Mario, amongst other games. Your basic attacks don't cost any action points, and your hits also generate action points. You spend these points, and this is the important part, on a couple of things. The first thing you can spend it on is ranged attacks called free shots that don't end your turn. There's a targeting reticle and you can shoot enemies. Think of your AP as your ammo for this, and when you do it, you're usually trying to target a particular weak spot on certain enemies, like it could be a head on most humanoid things, or this guy's carrying around a mine and you can shoot it to blow it up, or there's flying enemies that dodge most other forms of damage, so shooting them is really the only reliable way to hurt them in the first place. There's more uses to shooting, and it's actually a ton of fun, and one of my favorite elements that makes for a lot of great fight designs, but we'll get into that later, mostly in the next video. The main thing you're spending AP on, however, is your skills. You can have a loadout of up to 6 skills at a time, and as you level up your characters, you unlock way more than that as options, so you really have to craft what you're doing to your build. It's also the biggest way that all of the party members differ from one another, but this is really what everything is built around. It all supports this structure. You build up action points, you spend action points. You're ultimately juggling other resources and systems throughout this that are dependent on specific characters, but that's the flow of combat. Build up action points and spend them. Every time you use a skill, there's a little quick time event with this series of timing windows. You have to press A to get little bonuses, but that's far from the only thing in this turn-based combat system that you need to time out. When you're doing your attacks, it's pretty simple. Just press the button at the right time, and it's admittedly a very forgiving visual cue. Very easy. Getting attacked is a totally different story. Every single attack from every single enemy, literally all of them, can be dodged or parried. All of them. You could, in theory, do every single thing there is to do in this game on its hardest difficulty and never take a single point of damage. This is where the Dark Souls influence comes in, and this is the biggest influence from games like Paper Mario and Super Mario RPG and Lost Odyssey and a bunch of other JRPGs that have done this. But in regards to inserting it into a turn-based system, it has never felt this smooth and nuanced. For dodging, and I'm using the Xbox controller layout for this, but you can change keybinds and apply this to however you want it, but you have to press B just before getting hit by an attack. And attacks are usually not just one attack, as you can see. There's entire attack patterns that are unique to each enemy, and each enemy has several different patterns that you can learn. The timing window for dodging is, relatively speaking, pretty forgiving. Once you understand the pattern, it's often easy to dodge and take no damage, save for a couple mistakes. And of course, there's some boss fights and things that are a lot harder than others. But parrying is much harder, requiring far more precise timing. In fact, the same timing as getting what it'll call a perfect dodge, and it has some huge benefits. For starters, every time you successfully parry, you gain 1 action point, so that can give you tons of gas in the tank. But equally, if not more important, is that if you parry every single attack in a pattern, you'll do a counter attack, which can do loads of damage, but even more importantly, often fills a large chunk of the break meter. Most enemies, though it most often matters against bosses, the general enemies you kind of kill before it comes up, have a yellow meter that you can fill up underneath their health bar. Once it's full, you can use any skill that says "can break" in its description to stun the enemy and massively lower their defenses. On top of that, with many bosses, there's entire mechanics built around this, like revealing weak points you can shoot at, or getting a character back from their vor adventure in one case. But I'll go over that stuff in the next video. And if you thought dodge and parry were the only things you had to worry about during enemy attacks, you'd be super wrong. Well, actually, you're kind of right, but different flavors. There's some attacks that are accompanied by an action icon, and with those, instead of the normal reactions, you have to press A to jump. And if you manage to successfully jump to avoid the attack, you then also have a window where you can pull the right trigger to shoot the attacker while you're in the air. It's a ton of fun, and kind of like an enhanced dodge, but only on some attacks. Similarly, there's attacks that are signaled by a draining of color around the attacker, and if you press the right trigger while on the ground this time, at the right time, you'll do a gradient parry, which does a guaranteed counterattack, even just from the one success. The thing that makes these enhanced dodges and parries interesting is it gives you more buttons to press, so enemies can throw far more complex attack patterns at you and mix up the types of rewards you can get from handling them properly. It's great, and really helps to flesh out this game's wee to balance the story's woo.
Yes, wee. Back in the day, when there was nothing in the world except the 4 of us flying around on adventures.
There's one last shared mechanic I need to talk about before I can jump into the equipment system. Every time you spend action points on skills, and many other things if you have equipment for it, you gain progress towards what's called gradient charges, and when a bar fills up, you get a charge, with a maximum of 3 at a time. These are spent on massively powerful attacks and abilities that are totally different for each character, and they can often give you an extra turn afterwards too, so they're critical to setting up many of the game's glorious wombo combos. But that's the general combat systems, so I'll just take a quick moment to talk about equipment, and then we can move on to the specific characters themselves and their ranking. There are 108 different weapons in this game, and with the exception of each character's starter weapon with no abilities, and everyone's baguette, you heard that right, with the same abilities, they are all totally and radically different. I briefly gave consideration to ranking the weapons, but decided that was, even for me, maybe too much. So I'll just touch on a couple of my favorites for each character when I get there. But basically, you can level up the weapons to, and you guessed it, 33. And along the way, they'll do more damage and unlock 3 different abilities and bonuses that you can have as passive abilities that completely change how you approach a character. Like maybe one cares about stacking status effects, or another boosts cold damage, or one grants everyone shields. Most of them cater to specific abilities for that given character, but it's the cornerstone to what you'll want to build around. And then you get to load up on Lumina. In addition to each character's weapon, you can have 3 additional items equipped called Pictos. These give you passive bonuses to a bunch of your stats, and it's one of the biggest ways to really crank up the numbers. But more importantly, they also give passive abilities as well, and there are 193 of them. They can do basically anything, from increasing burn damage, to giving action points for certain things, to my personal favorite, automatically killing you at the start of a fight, then triggering a dozen different effects that happen when you die, then automatically resurrecting you, and triggering another dozen effects when you're resurrected. The biggest thing that Clair Obscur Expedition 33 took from Final Fantasy VIII is that you can, and are encouraged, to break the game in half. For most of the game, the damage cap per hit is 9,999. It's a pretty standard number in the genre. But once you get rid of that damage cap, through another Pictos you'll get eventually, I've seen someone do over 30 million damage in one hit, and in theory, there's a boss with over 70 million HP that people have one-shot. So, how do you accomplish that? Well, when you've used a Pictos through 4 fights on one character, they learn the ability it grants for the entire party, and you can spend Lumina points to equip those, much like equipping abilities in Final Fantasy IX. And if you really want, you can grind to get like 1,400 points on your characters and equip every Lumina ability in the game all at the same time. I haven't, and probably won't do that, but it's been an absolute blast seeing into the Matrix and cracking the code and breaking things in this game. In my current setup on finishing post-game stuff, I have Lune die, buff the whole team, debuff all the enemies, do a ton of damage to all the enemies, one-shot most non-boss fights, resurrect to full health, buff herself some more, fill all enemy break meters, then guaranteed go first in every fight forever, where she proceeds to shoot every enemy, breaking and stunning them all, and then I proceed to take my turn. And all of that is available because of the magic of Pictos and Lumina. I could do that with any of my characters, but I have Lune do it because I want her to go first, and I want her to shoot a ton. But we'll get to that soon, because I've finally finished explaining all of the core combat mechanics, and am ready to get to the character rankings. Coming in last place, mechanically, is Gustav. If you watched my narrative ranking, you know I adore this man. But ultimately, he's your first character. He's how you experience the tutorials and learn the ropes of the combat. They couldn't make him that complicated. He's still fun, don't get me wrong, but everyone else just has more going on. His whole thing is combo points. I mentioned that there's a surprising amount of World of Warcraft in Expedition 33, and this is some of it. If you're familiar with how rogues spend energy to gain combo points to get payoffs, that's almost exactly what you're doing. Your hits generate, in addition to action points, special charges, and many of your skills generate extra charges. But you have one particular skill called Overcharge that if you use it when you have a full grip of 10 charges, you do massive extra damage. It's fun, but it's also really straightforward and pretty repetitive. The rest of his toolkit is more situational stuff that sets up other characters, and he's got some reliable self-healing, so he's one of the more flexible party members, but he's not really doing anything else special besides the one trick. I love you and your weaponized mechanical arm, Gustav, but I wish you did more things with it.
Must fall.
Coming in 6th place and having far more interesting options, especially with the right weapons, is CL. I'm gonna make another WoW reference for people that are familiar with it here. She's a balanced druid, even down to the theming, waxing and waning between different modes, oscillating to get bonuses, spending them to get different bonuses, and constantly going back and forth. Some of her skills generate sun charges, and some generate moon charges. Additionally, most of your skills will either generate or consume stacks of something called foretell, which are stored on each hit enemy. Each of your sun and moon charges last 1 turn per charge and give a bonus. As long as you've got any sun charges, you gain 1 action point for every stack of foretell you consume, and if you've got any moon charges, you gain 1 action point for every stack of foretell you apply. But if you have both sun and moon charges, you consume those and enter Twilight for 2 turns, dealing increased damage, doubling the amount of foretell you apply, and even increasing the total amount of foretell you can dish out. So what this means is that you're trying to constantly take turns with CL as you manage the stance and maximize the amount of damage you can burst down in Twilight as often as you can. But what makes her really cool isn't her skills, as I think a lot of those are honestly pretty samey and not that exciting, but rather how her weapons have a tendency to radically change how you evaluate and interact with this whole system. You can have a weapon that makes your ranged shots consume foretell to do a ton of extra damage. You can have a weapon that makes you want to stack as many moon charges as possible, or another one that does the same for sun. But my favorite weapon for CL is one that puts her on a ticking clock. Corduron is a weapon that makes it so she's constantly afflicted by a negative effect called Curse, which is just a countdown of turns until she automatically dies. In Final Fantasy, this is the same as a thing called Doom. The weapon also increases her damage output by 50% as long as she's cursed, and entering Twilight resets the countdown. So as long as you're able to enter Twilight once every 5 turns, you have a permanent 50% damage boost, and I think it's a really fun juggling act to make sure she stays effective all the time without killing herself. And that's all enabled by one weapon. There's Pictos you can load her up with to get even more benefits from this and just go wild. The main reason she's down here in 6th, however, is that I really don't think her skills themselves are all that exciting. It's basically 20 different flavors of damage thing, mess with foretell, gain a charge, without that much regard for what else you're doing or what the rest of the party is doing. I wish there were more abilities that needed you to have certain amounts of sun or moon charges, like not just going, oh, well, you need to have some of them. Make me need to have like 4 or 5, or even the lack thereof to make the toolkit feel more varied, but it's what we have. Moving on, coming in 5th place, and this probably feels rude to Gustav and CL, is someone that you can't even take into combat. It's hard to talk about Esquier without getting at least a little into spoiler territory, but I'll try my best. The short version here is that he is your travel buddy on the overworld map. You can ride him like a mount, he can swim as your boat, and even fly as your airship. He has no combat mechanics whatsoever, despite being the most powerful entity in the world. So why is he ranked higher than people that can actually fight things? This does bleed into things I love about him narratively, so we kind of have to gloss over it here, but to keep it simple, he has guaranteed that every time I have a mount, boat, airship, any kind of transportation or ship or whatever in a game ever again, it will be boring and lame. It doesn't matter how cool the airship is, or if it's half demon or anything like that, it just will not feel like Esquier, both in how ridiculous his movement is, and especially in how whimsical his dialogue is. It's the little things that really elevate a game. And the design of SGA and how he takes one of the most boring parts of many JRPGs and makes it delightful is one of the best little things that this game does so incredibly well. It's done so well, in fact, that it makes even chocobos seem kinda lame, and that is a massive accomplishment.
What a weird creature.
Fourth place is definitely a step up from the others, though. You can only have 3 characters in your party at a time, and while it can come up to use everybody all in the same fight, since wiping your starting trio brings out the rest of the party in an uphill battle to finish the fight, these top 4 are the ones that I regularly utilized during the story. The exact configuration changed as I kept experimenting with new things, but ultimately, by the time I got to the end and beyond, Verso wound up being the odd one out to sit on the sidelines. I still really like him, I think he's a ton of fun, but I just thought the top trio synergized just a little bit more. Verso's entire gimmick is unlike all of the other characters, where I can easily point at inspiration from other games, leaning into the combat systems of Expedition 33 specifically. He has a mechanic called Perfection. It's got a letter grade, starting at D and working up to A, and then even on top of that, there's S rank. Every time you hit, dodge, or parry, you fill the letter a little bit, and when it's completely full, you move up 1 rank. Getting hit by enemy attacks causes you to lose progress, and you can even rank down, so you're really having to execute very well on this core combat system in order for Verso to be effective. What do these ranks do, you ask? I'm glad you did. Every rank gives a damage boost. The higher the rank, the higher the boost. And on top of that, all of Verso's skills have a bonus effect if you're a specific rank. And some of them are much better at building your perfection meter, or even, in a couple cases, just straight up put you on certain ranks. So if you're thinking this sounds like you have to really get good at the combat to make any use of Verso at all, well, that certainly can help. It's not entirely true, so don't worry. Many of his weapons offer options to manipulate this ranking system, like changing the rank floor to C instead of D, or making it harder or even impossible to lose perfection but with a drawback to compensate. Plus, his skill loadout is extremely flexible, allowing you to lean into playing perfectly if you want, or creating a set of options to always have value at every rank. My favorite weapon for Verso is Dualiso, which empowers his base attacks, the ones that aren't from skills, to not only do extra damage and generate large amounts of perfection, but also, the first time he uses one each time he would normally take a turn, he takes another free turn afterwards. This allows me to basically always get to at least B, and pretty easily account for at least one mistake on defense to reliably stay in B or A rank. And because you get AP from parries, and from the start of your turn, and from attacks, since I'm doubling up on some of those things, I basically never have to skip out on doing a skill on my free turn, and I am swimming in action points. The real goal for my Verso build is to have 9 AP when I hit S rank, dump 7 of them into ranged shots, and then use Follow-Up, a skill that only costs 2 action points when I'm in S rank, and it does extra damage for each shot I fired already that turn, up to 10 times. And thanks to Pictos and Lumina, sometimes I can gain AP when I hit with my shots, so it's not uncommon to fire the full 10 shots, then do this, and also have the damage bonus from S rank. It's a ton of damage and a really rewarding gameplay loop. I mentioned that Verso doesn't synergize as well as the top 3 characters do, and that's true. I'd say he would be my go-to solo character for the things that pop up for that, if not for the fact that the next character can do quite literally everything. Coming in 3rd place is our favorite talking paintbrush, Monoko. We got all that original stuff out of the way and we're back to it excellently ripping off established mechanics from other games. And I'm okay with that, because Monoko is a blue mage, one of my absolute favorite jobs in all of Final Fantasy. If you're unfamiliar with the concept of a blue mage, the idea is that they learn enemy attacks to use as their own abilities, and that's exactly what Monoko does, but he does it in the funniest way. The only blue mage that's funnier than Minoko is Kina from Final Fantasy IX, who literally eats enemies and can even cook bosses to learn crazy spells. But we're not here to talk about Kina, unless you want me to. I will. Don't tempt me. The way that Minoko learns enemy skills is very simple. You just have to have them in the party when you kill them once, and bam, you're done. But thematically, what's he doing? He's stealing their feet. Yep, he collects Nevron feet, 46 of them in fact, to learn their abilities. This can be regular enemies, it can be bosses you find through story elements, or ones you're able to encounter again in hidden areas or on the world map, and there is a huge variety of them. Minoko can really be built to do anything you want him to, between all of these skills and the variety of weapons he has. I've seen it's popular to have him be a support all-star, constantly buffing the whole team while putting out respectable damage. I can also see there's an easy build for him to be extremely tanky, or to be a glass cannon, but all of my favorite weapons for Minoko involve constant use of the bestial wheel. His whole gimmick, apart from being a blue mage, is that there's this wheel off to the side, and he utilizes masks. Technically, you can use any of your 6 assigned skills whenever you want, but you get huge bonuses for using certain skills when you have certain masks. Normally, the wheel only moves when you use a skill, but I spent a lot of the game playing with Fragaro as his weapon, which changes the wheel to a random mask anytime I use the free shot action. This let me load up the skills with cheap costs and then dump AP into free shots, fishing for whichever mask I wanted the skill I intend to use that turn. This was a fun experiment and I really enjoyed it, but I eventually got my actual favorite weapon from Minoko, Sidaro. The main thing this does is increases damage by 30% every time he uses an upgraded skill, meaning it matches the current mask. This can stack, as far as I can tell, infinitely. The other important thing is it does give 1 action point to both of my allies every time I use an upgraded skill, which is a massive benefit in keeping the engines running. So what I wound up landing on with Minoko is a very high damage output setup with some utility just natively baked in. Not every skill does tons of damage, but the others are critical. On Agile Mask, I charge up a huge chunk of the break meter, which is key to many boss fights, and it can even break if the meter fills up. With the Caster Mask, I can either heal Minoko or heal the rest of the party. Balanced Mask is where the damage does start to really come in though, doing some good single target damage and marking the enemy to take massive extra damage on the next hit, which can also set up other members of the party. Heavy Mask does huge, and I mean huge damage to all of the enemies and buffs the damage for the rest of the party. But the biggest thing I try to line up is having tons of AP and getting to Almighty Mask, where I do what the game calls extreme damage to one character and it can break. It's insane, and I do mean absolutely insane damage, the single highest output thing my team, as I have it built, can do. The magical Christmas Land scenario is to have someone break an enemy, then Minoko uses a gradient attack that does massive extra damage to enemies that are stunned, and also switches him into Almighty Mask, then use his extra turn to do this insanely powerful and expensive Duelist Storm skill. Minoko is definitely the glue guy to this team, doing whatever I need at any given time, and the process of figuring out what exactly I wanted his build to be, with so many options, was one of the most fun puzzles that Expedition 33 has to offer. But at the end of the day, it's pretty much just executing a set pattern, which is why, as much as I love him, the last 2 characters do rank a little higher because, well, I have to adapt and think. Which brings us to second place, Mael. She has what's probably the most complicated system in the game to execute. It requires planning ahead, it requires a constant stream of action points, which probably means setup from your teammates or excellent parry work, but when it works, it is beautiful. Immediately, Mael's combat mechanics reminded me of one of my favorite eras for warriors in World of Warcraft. In WoW, warriors use something called stances, and while you generally will stay in one stance the vast majority of the time, because they're integral to whichever role you're playing. But in PvP, There were times you'd be constantly swapping around trying to mitigate damage and make use of utility abilities that had to be in specific stances or burst abilities that had to be in others, and weather the storm from when whoever you're fighting blows their big cooldowns, and that's exactly what Mayel is doing, even down to the word stance. She uses 3 stances: defensive, offensive, and virtuose. Every time you use one of your skills, it switches you into a given stance, but if you take any action other than a skill, or try to switch into a stance you're already in, you become stanceless instead. Defensive makes you take less damage, and gain action points from every parry or dodge. So that's really big for the dodges, because that means that even if you're not perfect about it, you're still getting these action points. Offensive makes you do more damage, but you also take more damage, so it's a bit of a double-edged sword. But Virtuose triples your damage and doesn't have a downside. The first 2 are very easy to get into, but Virtuose sometimes requires a little more setup. Not necessarily a lot, but you do need some setup. Unless your weapon just does it, of course. Mayel's weapons are, I think, some of the most interesting ones in the whole game, because you can play her so many ways. She has weapons that care a ton about burn damage, which, now that I think about it, is thematically fitting, and I definitely left that out of my narrative ranking video. I'm making a note for that right now, there we go, to expand on that in the finale. Anyways, there's also weapons that care about staying in defensive stance as often as possible, or offensive, or even virtuose. Some of these weapons have conditions that automatically switch you into certain stances too, or give your allies tons of shields to protect them from full hits. I'm still not convinced this is my favorite weapon for her, because there's so much nuance and depth to how you can play Mayel that even with 72 hours of playtime as of scripting this video, I feel like I've barely scratched the surface for all of the different things she can do. But I spent a lot of the game with her using Melarum, which does 3 very cool things. First, anytime she switches into Virtuose stance, she heals her allies for 20% of their maximum health. Second, as long as she's at or above 80% health, she takes less damage. That's good. And third, if she drops below 50% health, she automatically switches to Virtuose. She's very difficult to kill, throws heals around to everyone, and my build allows me to just throw tons of damage constantly with her while propping everyone up. It's not as much damage as Monoko or Lune, but the ability that she has in order to keep the lights on with all this other utility is critical. But like I said, I do want to experiment with other weapons, and I'll probably do a lot of that when I get the last of the collection achievements from this file and start New Game Plus finally, to tackle the game on its highest difficulty. Maybe I'll try one where she just dishes out non-stop shields or burns the shit out of everyone. There's a weapon that makes burns on herself heal if she's in defensive stance, and also deal extra damage for each stack of burns she has, so that could be really cool to tinker with and make me have to think about the whole setup and all of the combat in this whole game radically differently. It's amazing, and really a sign of how much depth there is to the combat. More than any other character, I think that she has the most variety of playstyles, and the constant stance management is not only extremely engaging, it's also some of the most rewarding mechanics Expedition 33 has. And that leaves just one more person left to rank. Obviously, by process of elimination, my favorite character mechanically in Clair Obscur Expedition 33, and unless I'm forgetting something, the only person that literally never left the party for the entirety of my playtime once I initially unlocked them, is Lune. What can I say? I'm nothing if not consistent about my love for spellcasters. Lune is this game's only real spellcaster, tapping into Chroma, the life force of the world, to unleash devastating attacks and rescue allies from the brink of death. All of her skills generate elemental charges called stains, which can then be spent to gain bonuses on those same skills. There's 4 elements: ice, fire, earth, and lightning, but you can also get light stains, a wild card that counts as any of them. Just as there are 4 elements, you can hold 4 stains at once. If you generate a 5th stain, it replaces the oldest one you have, and the management of this system is the biggest that this game provides. Not only is Lune able to nerf enemies, lowering their speed, attack, defense, any of it, she can light them on fire, stun them, heal your allies, and deal devastating damage. There's really 5 ways to build Lune, with a couple options for each, based on her weapons and other things. You can really focus on one element at a time, with weapons that deal extra damage of a given element and provide other bonuses, offering 4 different styles there, because there's 4 elements, or you could focus on having as much variety as possible. I very much leaned into the last one, though there's merit to the others as your party calls for it. For example, if I tried that burn build I mentioned for Mael, I'd probably want Lune to do the same and dish out tons of fire attacks. Quite early on, though, I got what wound up being my favorite weapon for Lune and the driving force behind how I built the entire party. Trebuchem is a weapon that ensures a constant stream of stain production. First, your free shots generate 1 random stain for every shot. Second, your base attacks generate 2 random stains, and critically, you generate 1 action point for every stain you spend. So this means that if I use 4 free shots to generate 4 stains, then spend all 4 on one skill, I get the 4 action points I spent on those shots refunded. This is where my most used skills for Lune come into play. Mayhem is a skill that spends all of your generated stains to deal 1 high damage hit per stain consumed, and if you spent 4 this way, it can break the target if their break meter is filled. This lets me just keep the stain factory going, but what I really want is to get 1 of each stain as the 4, so I can use Elemental Genesis, which can only be cast by using 1 of each different type of stain. Setting up with my other utility abilities that generate 1 specific type and then also a light stain makes this surprisingly easy, especially if I have the extra AP. I can fish for the missing stains by dumping them into free shots, and it does ludicrous, massive damage. This doesn't do quite as much single target damage as Minoko's almighty Masked Duelist Storm, but it targets every enemy, so it has the highest overall damage output I've used in the game. And on top of that core plan being so good, there's only 2 skills, so I'm able to get a ton of flexibility and utility from the other 4, like access to debuffs, while also matching elemental weaknesses of the enemies to put on some extra hurt. I simply adore all of the planning Lune requires, and the payoff is oh so satisfying, utilizing every single mechanic the game offers, from needing tons of AP from parrying, to taking advantage of free shots, to elemental type matchups, so much more than any other character, to juggling resources on resources on resources, to reinforcing my absolute favorite fantasy combat archetype out of them all. Lune is the pinnacle of mechanical design in Clair Obscur Expedition 33. But is she the pinnacle of characters? When factoring in story, which I think is equally, if not more important when it comes to this game, not quite. I won't cover the details of the narrative ranking so as not to spoil things for people wanting to avoid that, but as a quick rundown from 7th to 1st, the narrative rankings were Minoko, then CL, then Lune, then Esquier, then Gustave, then Mael, and then Verso. So how does that mesh with our mechanical rankings? In 7th place, having finished 6th both narratively and mechanically, is CL. I do want to reiterate, as I've done, that every single party member in this game is phenomenal. So coming in last is not to say that CL sucks or anything. Everyone is great, and it's one of the most incredible ensemble casts of any game ever made. But someone has to be last, and it's CL. Coming in 6th place is Minoko. Everyone's favorite gestural, well, maybe 2nd favorite. Noko is pretty damn adorable. Could be 3rd? Golgra's pretty funny. There's the guy recreating the "This is fine" meme, too. Well, he's a gestural, and he was 7th place narratively and 3rd place mechanically. As much as I really like the Blue Mage system he has going on mechanically, and as much as he holds my whole party together, apart from a couple of truly great moments, he's definitely the weakest character narratively, and was the only one that didn't make me cry at all. Although, Noko, I mean... So that brought him way down. 5th place is Esquier. And yes, I know, it's silly to include a party member that's not really a party member, but I love Esquier too much to not include him. He gives the best hugs, and as I mentioned in this video, he will make every mode of transportation in any other game I play feel lame. So that makes up for his lack of actually ever doing anything, really. Mechanically, that is. Oh man, he carries a lot of narrative. 4th place overall is Gustav. After having come 3rd in narrative ranking and dead last in the mechanical ranking, I want to highlight just how much his narrative ranking is carrying him here. I mentioned this in that video, but there is a big leap from 4th to 3rd narratively, and really, his combat was fine. It's just fine. He could have had no combat mechanics, actually, and he still probably would have been placed 4th here. That's just how much his narrative had an impact on me, and he didn't even finish 1st there. Coming in 3rd place overall, after placing 5th narratively and 1st mechanically, is Lune. She's integral to the plot working out and has a lot more depth than initially meets the eye, but the real star here is the mechanics. The last two also took the top 2 spots narratively, but Lune rode the combat as high as she could, in helping her beat out even Gustav's story strengths, and that says a lot. The penultimate ranking, 2nd place, 1st place loser Ricky Bobby, is Verso. Sure, he got my top spot narratively, but as I explained in that video, him and Mael were basically tied, and the tiebreaker was that Verso hurt me more on an emotional and human level, because I'm weird like that and I like it. They are truly amazing characters, and the fact that this game has 2 characters that are this good is just insane. The entire Final Fantasy franchise has only maybe 2 or 3 characters better than the 2 of them, and the jury's still out, so it might actually just be Vivi, my favorite fictional character from any medium, and these are both in one game. Verso really is one of the most nuanced, intricately written, lifelike characters I've ever seen in a game, or really anything else. And his motivations are confounding in the moment, believe me, and then in an instant of clarity, they make perfect sense. But mechanically, he's just not there. Don't get me wrong, he's a ton of fun, he's great. But he did finish 4th there for a reason. And that leaves just one. Mael is my overall favorite character in this game, having placed 2nd both narratively and mechanically. When you're running around, so anytime you're not in combat and not at the party's camp, you can swap which character you're running around as with a button, and I almost always ran around as Mael. She is such a great character, and more than anyone else, she's yearned for this adventure, and more than anyone else, the world is ready to hurt her. She is the main character, and they definitely spent the time to make her a good one, filled with ups and downs, and sorrow, and joy, and tragedy, and ecstasy. It's worth mentioning that she has the best also leitmotif in the game. I'm a sucker for a good leitmotif. I love when you just have a musical cue that's like, great. I truly love Mael. In the narrative video, I talked about how Gustav might technically be my favorite character in the game, even if I don't think he's the best one. One of the reasons I think is that I see a bit of myself in him, or maybe more, I see what I would like to be. I want to be Gustav. We're basically the same age. We're both mechanically engineer-minded people that love seeing how things work, how things can tinker. We're optimists that have a genuine love for the innate good of shared humanity and what that can do. And my God, if I lived in the world of this game and Gustav didn't adopt Mael, I would have. She's not a perfect person. In fact, she's quite flawed, but I still want to see her succeed in all of her endeavors and find true, lasting happiness, and that kind of writing, that character writing combined with combat mechanics that are some of the most exhilarating joy that video games can produce as a medium, puts her at the top. I cannot overstate how great Mael is. This is a character that the video game industry produces once in a generation, if that, and will ultimately be the deciding factor for how highly this game ranks at the end of this project. I predict that 50 years from now, we'll point at Clair Obscur Expedition 33, and by extension, Mael, is a touchstone moment in this, relatively speaking, still quite young art form, having elevated it to new heights, reaching levels of connection with an audience that non-interactive mediums like cinema and novels will never be able to achieve. I told myself that this would be a shorter and simpler video than the others in this project, and, well, would you look at the time. I hope I conveyed just how much I really love this cast through this video and the last one. But next time, we're talking about all the stuff they kill. I'll see you soon with a video ranking all of the boss fights in Clair Obscur Expedition 33, and there's a lot of them.
I have decided on her name. And her name will be Mael.